Hey Townies, welcome back. I'm Phil.
And I'm Ken.
And today, what are we going to discuss today, Ken, that people might want to talk about?
Well, we and you talked about AI lately, and then we talked about maybe collapse of the dollar. And then you get a lot of people asking you, well, what do you think is going to happen? And then the second question is, well, how should I prepare?
Yeah, right. That's a big one.
That's exactly what it usually comes. And then everybody's situation is different when you come to prepare for something. Some people have families, some people don't. Some people have medical conditions to think of, and a lot of people, you need to think about your age.
That's true. I think your age is really important because you're age limited, I think.
Correct.
Like if you're, well, not just age limited, but, disability, whatever. But generally, the elderly will need help. Whereas if you're, but I know some elderly people that are in better shape than people that are in their
probably better than me
30s and 40s.
Better
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like my dad's one of them. He's 80 and he's in shape. But yeah, I agree with that. That's a good topic.
Well, and the thing is it's not just prepping, and people think you're a prepper, but to set the parameters and break it down into different situations, and it's what you're prepping for or something like that, because that's what they're saying. Well, what do we do? Well, what's your situation? Where do you live?
Yeah.
So, if you set the parameters of what you're talking about when it comes for different preparedness situations, first off, you're going to look at, are you a prepper or you're a survivalist? A prepper, you might have a pile of food stored, and it might be the long-term survival food, but is that really going to last you? And is that what you really need at the time?
Yeah, so basically, I think someone who, like I have that. I have probably a month's worth of food. But I think it's mainly I'm staying in my house.
Yeah.
But the reason I'm picking to stay in my house is my environment. Like I'm not in a city.
Yes, and that's your next question. Do you bug in or bug out? That usually comes up.
I'm going to say if you're in a city, you're bugging out. You're getting to the country. You're getting out of that town. And if you're in the country like we are, I think you're pretty good where you're at. You could probably move a little bit depending on what happened here in town or in our area, but I'm thinking you could probably survive just staying right where you're at.
And what you're saying right there also takes us down this winding road of what preparedness is. And what I mean by that is once you're saying I'm going to bug out, what are you bugging out in? What type of vehicle is it? Is it 4-wheel drive? What is the gas mileage on it? Are you going to be able to get fuel? And then, like I said, we'll get to all of that kind of stuff later, as we start deciding what, but right now we'll stick with parameters.
Okay.
Like you said, are you bugging in or are you bugging out? Is that one thing to think of?
Yeah.
Also, if you're bugging in, is it everything necessary you need? What do you need right off the bat?
Oh, you're going to need food and water.
Food and water.
That's it. And water before food.
Correct.
You definitely are going to need a lot of water before you need any food.
So there's your preparedness, whether you're bugging in or bugging out.
Yes.
So you're going to need water.
Definitely.
So if you're bugging out, are you going to need stuff to filter water?
Yes.
You may even need that at home.
Oh, yeah. Well, the thing is the big thing I think of when you say that is your environment first, right? Mm-hmm. Your environment plays a huge role. So if you live in New York City or Baltimore or Miami or, one of those places, Atlanta, you're getting the hell out of town. Well, and it also depends on what happens, what you're told across the media, what happens.
Yeah.
And what you're going to do based off of that.
And it's different situations. So when you're starting to talk about our parameters, are you bugging in and bugging out, whether you're in an urban situation, a suburb situation, or even rural, because most places would be considered a suburb situation, I think, because even in the small towns out in the country is more of a suburb setup to the larger metropolis cities.
Okay, so yeah,
how far are your neighbors? That's a big thing.
Yes. So how far do you think they should be? That's a big thing, right? How far do you think your neighbors should be in that type of scenario? Should you have any neighbors? But you're going to need people.
Yes, you're going to need people. You're going to need community. But the one thing that people don't think about is I'm going to move out in the woods and build a house, and somebody's going to show up.
Oh, they're coming sooner or later.
Yes, sooner or later they will show up. And the thing is, if you're out there by yourself, nobody will hear you scream.
No.
And that's what I mean.
They're not going to hear the gunfire either.
No, if you have to holler help, who's coming?
Ain't nobody coming.
That's right.
If you got to bug out, if you got to get out, or any of that happens, you cannot count on anybody coming to help you for anything.
So these isolationists out there, I'll be out on my farm, I'll do this, I'll do that. Well, when you're out on your farm and you're by yourself or you and your family, you have to leave the house. You have to do something on the farm. You have animals to tend to.
Yep.
you'll be taken advantage of. I think you would be taken
Oh,
advantage of.
I think a group of 10 guys, I mean, he's done. They're going to take the whole farm, especially if they're armed.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you need a good community. That's a great point. Food, water.
Yeah.
Water is number one.
So we're working on parameters here. Before we even get into what possible situations might be. I mean, it might be a nuclear attack, or it might be, when you say nuclear, it might be actual nuclear fallout where you might need stuff like that, pills and stuff, or it might just be,
I have those too.
an EMP.
Yep. Oh yeah. That would be. I think
That might be more.
That might be worse.
Yeah.
If they killed all the electronics, I think that would be worse.
Yeah. And then that leads right into hurricanes, thunderstorms, natural disasters, and you might have electrical grid problems without the EMP.
Yeah.
Just standard electrical grid
That's
problems.
true. Or they could just take the electrical grid. I mean, there's 100 different scenarios.
Yeah.
The main one that I think of is probably.
And we'll start talking about all them scenarios. If you go back in history, when I say history, you go back to the last turn of the century, you had food shortages and all when the Great Depression and all happened. And it was, you didn't have factory farms like you do now. You wasn't making thousands of chickens, stuff like that. So coming into the Great Depression, the government was even hurting. And then you talk about financial issues and collapse of the dollar and stuff. People say buy gold, buy silver. Well, there was that act in 1933, the Gold Act.
They took it all.
And where the government come and took all your gold.
They came and took all your gold.
Yeah.
That's what makes me like, I don't want to buy gold.
And we'll go down to the financial,
I don't want to buy
situation.
gold.
So, we'll get into that. So, I mean, the scenarios are endless here. And like I said, once you start branching out into these different scenarios, you can spend all the time on one scenario alone.
Oh, you can spend hours on one. Especially, I have a plan. What's your plan? That's the big thing. Is what's your plan going to be based on where you live? And then not only based on where you live, but based on what actually transpired.
Yes.
To make you have to do something.
And that could be something where you plan to stay at home, but maybe you're forced out of your home. Now you went from a bugging in to a bugging out situation.
Survival.
And in that case, well, it's not really survival as far as...
What's your difference between prepping and surviving? I mean, that's a good question. What's the difference between prepping and survival?
To me, prepping is you're set up for the moment, not long term.
So like 30 days under, 60 days or under.
Yeah. It's something like that. Something like that.
Where society will come back in about 30 days. Yeah. We just got some major issues like with power or whatever. But it's going to come back.
Because, I mean, it used to be in the early 2000s, you heard these two terms, Teotwalkie. You ever heard of that?
No.
Teotwalkie and WROL. So it's World Without Rule of Law.
Oh, I've heard of that.
And
I've heard that one.
Teotwalkie is the end of the world as we know it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And that got famous then those two terms got famous. You also had the zombie apocalypse getting famous. When they started selling the green knives and the zombie bullets. Yeah,
because of the Walking Dead TV show.
Yes.
That thing sent everybody over the top.
And then they started using
stuff.
Zombie as a slang for different things.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
people hoping for it. I'm like, you people are out of your mind to hope for anything like that.
Yeah.
You have no clue what you're talking about.
I think most people have no clue what they're talking about when it comes to what they're expecting with prepping, because when I say that is depending on the scenario, and if it's like the world without you, the way we know it, the first thing that's going to collapse there is your medical stuff. Oh. People that need life dependent drugs, or people that are on dialysis. That is the kind of stuff.
They'll be the first ones probably to not make it.
I mean, what's the old saying when it comes to survival? The grocery store has 3 days,
and
then total anarchy in 3 weeks.
Oh, absolutely. That's true. That's very true. Because if the trucks stop running for 3 days, the grocery stores will be empty.
Yep.
If all the trucks stop running.
And then you got to figure out all the stuff that's going to go spoil or bad. So if you're actually prepping or if you're prepping, you need to know what's going to spoil quickest. I mean, do you have freezers? If everything's in the freezer, if you have no energy backup.
I like how people say, well, I'll just go out and hunt. Okay, that's great. But if you don't have any electricity, how are you going to keep your meat? Right? That's a great question.
Yes, and that's what it comes back to what I was saying about history. Mm-hmm. They say things are lost in 3 generations.
Yeah.
So, and it's sad to say, I couldn't even say all 4 of my great-grandparents' names.
Yeah, I can't.
But yet they stored meat and they stored stuff without refrigeration probably.
Yeah, they did. Because I don't think the refrigerator came out until like the early 1900s or no, late 1800s.
Well, and then that was shoving a block of ice in the bottom of it.
Yeah. They would have all these blocks of ice. They'd have train cars full of ice, and they'd drop them off in towns. And
Yep.
people would come and get them. Yeah, I don't know how, like, they'd be like, well, you just salt it. I'd be like, salt it? I don't know how to do it.
Well,
I really don't know how to do it.
And you can ruin it by oversalting it also.
Yeah, like there's a...
It'll be unedible.
Yeah, right? So you got to really know what you're doing, and you're just like, well, I guess I'm only killing rabbits because I can only kill a rabbit and eat that one rabbit that day. If you kill a deer, you're going to have meat for a while.
So, I mean, they say hard times create great men. Soft times create soft men. You know? And I think all that is lost. And then, like I said, even prepping comes back to history now because the stuff that our great-grandparents knew, nobody knows.
They don't. None of us know. I don't. Do you know?
No.
I mean, I will say this. I have YouTube stuff to figure out how to do some things like that. Like sometimes I'll just sit there and be like, that interests me. I want to find out how they did that. Here's a big one. Agriculture. I don't know how to grow things. I mean, and here's probably what everybody will say. I know how to take the seed and put it in the ground. Well, the problem is you got to know what kind of ground you have.
Yes.
And what you can grow and what you can't grow. And then what you grow one year, you have to grow something else.
You rotate it.
Yeah, it's something completely different to put nutrients back into the soil. There's a science to that. And that's completely lost.
That's completely lost because a lot of your big factory farms use fertilizer from natural gas.
Yeah.
So
they do.
Yeah, so they're actually supplementing the soil so they're not rotating the crops.
Yeah, or from, what is it, grain, corn. So you're right. There's a whole bunch of things that I think, and honestly, why they don't teach you any of that in school. They don't teach you anything.
No.
They teach you, I remember in high school, I think it was high school or no, it was probably middle school. Our middle school teacher taught us about growing things and how you would actually have to rotate crops to put nutrients back into the soil. But as far as like making that a requirement for high school kids to graduate, I think that would be great. There's a bunch of things they could do besides what curriculum they offer, but I think that'd be a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's lost in high school is back to what we just said, though, history.
Yeah, like it gets to the point where technology is taken over and everybody, hey, we're never going to need that again. Well, that's not true.
Yeah, you never know, and that's what preparedness is all about.
Yeah, it's not true. At some point, and it's just probably mathematics will tell you, at some point, our country will have something enormously devastating happen. It will happen. Just from like asteroids hitting the Earth. They've always hit the Earth. They always will hit the Earth. It's just just like volcanoes freaking erupting.
Yellowstone caldera.
I mean, there's always something that can happen. It just, is it going to happen in our generation or 50 generations from now? We don't know. But I guarantee you this. If you don't pass on that knowledge to every generation, then nobody's going to ever have it. And for the people who are going to need it in the future or now, it's something that they should have.
Well, while we're on this right now, before we even move on to anything else, that's what we should talk about as far as like the history part of it, as far as nobody knows the gold standard. The gold was confiscated. How many people taught that?
And what was it confiscated for? Do you remember? It was World War II.
No, it wasn't. It was the Great Depression. And
that's right.
And the government needed money.
That's right. It was. Yes.
It was the Great Depression.
It's all sitting in Fort Knox. They took everybody's gold, and if you had gold on you, I want to say you got a prison sentence. Like if you didn't turn it in,
I'd have to look it up. Yeah, you had to turn it in.
You got a prison sentence for it, and the penalties were extreme for keeping gold, and they literally you had to go turn it all in. So all them coins that people hoard, what are you gonna do? Not turn it in?
And around the same time period, you had the bonus army. You ever heard of that?
No. What's a bonus army?
The bonus army, and then I bring this up is because people would say, the U.S. military will never be used on civilians. Well,
I'm going to say that's not true.
That is 100%. They have been used.
Yes.
U.S. Everybody brings up Tiananmen Square where the Chinese brought out tanks.
Yeah.
The U.S. used tanks on their own people.
Where was that?
In Washington, D.C.
When? Had to be in like the 70s or the 60s.
Nope.
When?
It was the bonus army was your World War I veterans.
Oh, yeah?
And they were promised a bonus. If you went stateside, you got paid so much. And if you went overseas, you got paid so much as a bonus.
But were they actually utilized? Like, did they use them to inflict something onto the American people.
Yes, that bonus army, they had 17,000 veterans, and I think 24,000 people, members of their families and all with them, camped out right in front of the Capitol and all that, I believe.
When was that? World War One?
It was after World War One. It was the Depression.
In between World War One and World War Two.
The Depression was coming on. And what's interesting about it, the person in charge to get rid of them was would have been, at that time, he was in charge of the 3rd Cavalry, I think, was Patton.
Really?
He was a major.
No kidding.
And in charge of him was MacArthur.
Oh, wow. That's two powerful names right there.
Yeah, and I think the president was Coolidge at the time.
Was it?
Yeah, I think it was Coolidge. And he ordered MacArthur to get them, and Patton brought in 4 tanks along with the infantry and took them out.
No kidding.
Only 4 people died, but they destroyed all their, because they had makeshift tents and all that set up in there.
Oh, wow.
And they called it the bonus army. So you had your future World War II veterans kicking out the World War I veterans.
Oh, my God.
Like I said, Patton was a major. He brought in 4 tanks.
Wow.
I think only 6 people died is all it was, though, but I forget how many injured.
Yeah, the history is amazing.
So will the U.S. use the military against civilians? Now,
I think it depends on the reason.
Now, you want to bring up the 60s, you had Kent State with the National Guard.
Yeah, I remember that. I don't remember that.
But I think it was like 68
remember,
or something.
Yeah, I remember reading that.
Yeah.
It's just as bad with like the FBI with Waco and what was the other big one?
Ruby Ridge.
Ruby Ridge. FBI does the same thing.
Yep.
FBI, I think, is more inclined to be a practitioner like a military to do that instead of the actual military. That's what it seems like anymore.
Yeah.
It seems like your FBI is taking more of that role.
But once again, we brought up 2 incidences, the bonus army, where they did use the military against civilians, and the gold confiscation. And I'm sure we could dig up more and more, but you don't hear about any of that in school.
No, you don't hear none of it. None of it. They don't teach you a lot of things that they should. And I don't know why. I'm sure there's a reason.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a reason also.
I'm sure there's a reason that they're not allowed to do that, but there's a lot of things that they should teach that they don't. I agree with you with that.